Welcome to the Entrepreneurial Musician with Andrew Hitz, a podcast from the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network featuring interviews with the best and brightest entrepreneurs and innovators in the music business. Today's episode features the Dean of the Lawrence Conservatory of Music, Brian Pertl. Brian has done everything from traveling to Tibet to study sacred chanting to being employed as an ethnomusicologist at Microsoft in charge of selecting sound clips that were heard by millions of people. He is now a forward-thinking dean who is passionate about both creation and entrepreneurship. He tells us all about it next. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Entrepreneurial Musician with Andrew Hitz podcast. I am your host, Andrew Hitz, and I am honored to be joined by the Dean of the Lawrence Conservatory of Music, Brian Pertl. How are you today, Brian?
I am doing very well.
Great. Obviously, I choose guests because they have interesting careers, so I can say this about all of them, but I will say that after reading Brian's bio, that you have one of the most interesting and diverse, and the one that bios I've ever read, one that like just begs me to want to ask you about 15 questions about how you got from point A to point B and then point B to point C. And so I think we're all going to learn an awful lot from your very circuitous route that you've taken to your current position. So again, thank you for joining us.
I am excited to be here.
All right. So first things first, you were a trombone performance major at Lawrence University, and then you were also an English major. How did you come about having both of those passions?
That's a great question. I actually grew up in Utah and loved school, loved music, was the typical band geek and orchestra geek, and was in every ensemble I possibly could be in, but also really loved academics, science, English, everything along just about every kind of academic venture I loved. So when it came time to try to pick out a college, I was trying to find a college that both had a strong music program, conservatory music, and a strong small liberal arts college. And so I wound up going from Utah to Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin. And so that's what I did. I pursued those 2 degrees at Lawrence University, trombone performance and English. And I always tell people when I'm talking to prospective students here, clearly the 2 degrees that guarantee financial success in life, trombone performance and English.
I know a number of trombone players that struggle with speaking English, let alone studying it on a collegiate level. So, yeah, you're kind of poking holes in all of those fun stereotypes. So says the tuba player. Yeah, I'm kind of on thin ice there, but exactly. I never worry about going out onto the thin ice in order to make a joke happen. So, and then after you graduated from Lawrence, you then did some really extensive traveling. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. My plans right after Lawrence, I had started taking orchestral auditions, and I was playing a lot in jazz around the area. But I had applied for a 1-year fellowship called the Watson Fellowship, which allowed you to travel around the world for a year studying whatever you're passionate about. And I ended up putting in a proposal that focused on the didgeridoo, the Australian Aboriginal didgeridoo, and Tibetan Buddhist sacred music. And what those 2 had in common, the study was going to be about societies that used harmonics and music as an integral part of their music making. So didgeridoo was very sort of rich in harmonics and vowel sounds, and so is Tibetan sacred chant. So I spent a year in those 2 places just doing a deep dive in Aboriginal culture and Tibetan Buddhist culture. And it was quite a shock because I had no background as an undergraduate either in anthropology, or I had never even heard of ethnomusicology at that time. And I thought it would be sort of this one amazing year, and then I'd come back and pick up my trombone and, off I would go. But what happened was I fell in love with the idea of the diversity of music in this world. And I was so excited by what I had studied, but also about the possibilities of so many other music cultures that upon my return, I decided to go into the field of ethnomusicology. And that was kind of like this big turn off of, what I saw as a pretty straight performance-oriented career path.
Wow, fascinating. So I'm already picking up that that when you found something, and I'm guessing it's still the case today, that when you found something that you were interested in, that you went deep. It's obvious that you're passionate about things, which seems to be a common theme from the people that I'm interviewing for this podcast.
I think it is, and I think it's what excites me. I got very interested in the didgeridoo primarily because it was so different than the trombone in that it's a termite hollowed log. So basically it has one note. So all the years that I spent in practice rooms, hours a day, working on my scales and, all of this technical facility of many notes, all of a sudden I was confronted with an instrument that basically had one note. But through shaping your vowel sounds and adding your voice, it basically had a universe of notes contained within that one note. So it was kind of a revelation, and it also helped me go back to the trombone and listen to it and approach Western music in different ways as well.
Very interesting. Yeah, the not to go too far off on a classical music tangent from the entrepreneurial thing, but yeah, that kind of reminds me of I was working the other day with someone on a Brahms symphony, like Brahms 2, the tuba part. There's a bunch of entrances in the first movement where the tuba complements the very end of the trombone chorales, and where they're one and sometimes two notes, and you can make a whole lot of music with those two notes.
Yes.
Yeah, which is a much more advanced thing than playing the ride well.
Right.
When you really break it down. So
it was that nuance, and so I came back to the United States and decided to pursue this world of ethnomusicology and went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut to get my MA in ethnomusicology, focused on Tibetan music, Tibetan sacred Buddhist music there, and then went out to the University of Washington to get my PhD in ethnomusicology out in Seattle. And out there's actually a fairly robust didgeridoo culture, which is kind of hard to believe, but the trombonist out there at the time, the great Stuart Dempster, had also won a Fulbright and studied didgeridoo and had been teaching the only 4-credit didgeridoo class at a university in the United States. So over the years, literally hundreds of didgeridoo players had graduated from this class of his, and so the area had this really deep knowledge of didgeridoo. And I actually was getting a little upset because I kept getting calls for gigs, but they were always for didgeridoo. They were never for trombone. And I kept thinking, I've spent my whole life in practice rooms, like working on the nuance of becoming a really fine trombonist. And then people just call me and they keep asking me to play this termite hollowed log. And it was like, it started to bug me. And
right.
then I stepped back and I realized, wait a second, I'm playing all these amazing, amazing gigs because I play didgeridoo. And instead of being, having some animosity toward it, I should just embrace it and go along for the ride. And I was able to play for the launch of the Boeing 787 and, solo didgeridoo before Seattle Mariners games and, all these great gigs because I played didgeridoo. So I sort of embraced that as a different, thing, kind of as an identity that started to become almost like a pathway to a whole bunch of new career opportunities that I didn't expect, including my next career opportunity, which was working for that little software company out in Seattle called Microsoft.
I've heard of them.
Yeah. So that actually all started because I played didgeridoo. I was at the University of Washington getting my degree in ethnomusicology, and Microsoft was just at the verge of starting to get into multimedia and the new technology of the early 90s, the CD-ROM. And they were creating a CD-ROM on musical instruments, and they needed a 30-second didgeridoo clip. So I got a call out of the blue, and the guy on the other end said, we heard you play didgeridoo. We need 30 seconds. We'll give you $50. It's like, great, $50. Awesome. I get $50 from Microsoft. So I go out there and I play the 30-second clip, and they said, do you want to see this? What's going into? And I said, yes. And they showed me the prototype CD-ROM player and, showed me this beautiful, what would have been a coffee table book, but now on the computer had that little audio file, and you click it. And all of a sudden, I'm hearing all of these world music instruments that I didn't hear until I was in graduate school. I got very excited. I just thought, this is going to change everything. Because instead of waiting until you're a PhD candidate to hear these crazy instruments, you could be a kindergartner and be sitting in your house and hearing didgeridoos and koras and djembes and, besides all the Western instruments. And I said, this is what I've been studying, is musical instruments and world music, and I'm an English major. And they said, well, we're looking for an editor. Would you like to edit the CD-ROM? And, the first thought that came to my mind is, boy, I don't know how to edit a CD-ROM. And then the second thought was, well, nobody does, because nobody's ever done it, right? It's like no one's done this.
Sure.
And so I just said, yes, I'd do that. And that launched a 16-year career at Microsoft, where I was basically hired on as an ethnomusicologist. The big Encarta encyclopedia and World Atlas products came out. They needed literally hundreds of samples of music, both classical, pop, and world music. And that's for 3 years. I sat in a room and listened to music for 8 hours a day, making selections for CD-ROMs and picking out the 30-second clips, writing the captions, working on the licensing. And it was sort of this brilliant career that I had no idea existed.
Fascinating.
And at the top of that, of the Encarta, when they were making all the different language versions of Encarta, we had 7 ethnomusicologists working at Microsoft, which I think was probably the largest employer of ethnomusicologists in the world. So it was kind of this amazing time, and it was sort of this fascinating world where you knew what the audio you were selecting and what you were doing could possibly be out there in front of millions of people. There were 13 million copies of the Encarta Encyclopedia sold. And it was kind of this strange juxtaposition from my life, my aspirations as an ethnomusicologist and an academic, where there may be 12 people who specialize in Tibetan music in the world.
Right.
And now you're doing stuff that could impact, millions of people. It was, that was very exciting. And all along, as I was doing the job at Microsoft, I was also going out across the state of Washington and giving talks on world music, on didgeridoo, on Tibetan music, on band traditions around the world. I really felt that need to be out in front of people, like in a very personal way, not just on what I selected on a CD-ROM. So I was still performing and I was still lecturing and I was doing this job at Microsoft, and it was sort of this multifaceted musical life out in Seattle.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, that's complete. That Microsoft employed 7 ethnomusicologists at once. That's not something I would have guessed. And yet, I am old enough to have owned one of those CD-ROMs, so which my parents bought for me. And yeah, at that age, I never thought for even a moment about how there was a human being or human beings somewhere who had decided what music was being used and then wrote the thing. It's just, it's like a regular encyclopedia as a kid. You don't think that there are people actually wrote this. I mean, this is just knowledge. It's the book, It's like, it's just handed down from somewhere. So, it's hard to read just about any business book that's reputable without seeing the word pivot in it somewhere, in terms of career, and you're going down this path, and then you end up going down this other path, and that's like a textbook pivot that you discussed, which was that you were studying. And it sounds to me like, you were a performance major at the conservatory there, and so I bet you were pretty good at the trombone and continued to work at it. And then that you at first got frustrated because you were getting calls for something that you quote unquote shouldn't have been over this other skill, and then you just kind of went with it and pivoted, and then you ended up in an office at Microsoft with them offering for you to choose music clips for millions of people. It's a really fascinating story.
And that pivot, that moment where I decided to, I was almost done with my PhD in ethnomusicology. I had finished all the coursework, but hadn't taken the exams and obviously hadn't written the dissertation. And my aspirations were to teach ethnomusicology in a small college, something like Lawrence, where I had studied. And so that was a moment of deciding that this Microsoft opportunity was just too good to pass up. But I also felt in my heart that, a certain sadness that turning away from my PhD program meant that I wouldn't be able to get back to a college and be a part of that life, which I really, cherish, that life of learning and helping others sort of reach their full potential in learning. So, to me, that was kind of one of those critical moments, but, I left it without regret, had this wonderful run at Microsoft. And then, the strangest thing happened, which was, again, I got a call to play didgeridoo, but this time it was from my alma mater, Lawrence University. And they called to say, we'd like you to come back and do a recital on didgeridoo and Tibetan trumpets and harmonic singing and whatever weird stuff you want to do. It's up to you. And I remembered sort of the more conservative conservatory that I left when I was a student. I like, are you sure? Like, you really want didgeridoos and harmonic singing? And yes, you got to come out here and do this. And so I thought, well, that'll be a blast. Come back to my university and do that. So that was in 2007, after 16 years at Microsoft, and went out to play this gig, and I played, and it seemed to be well received, and go backstage, and my old trombone professor and mentor was back there, Fred Sturm, a really amazing jazz pedagogue, and he said, "Brian, we got to talk." And I said, "What is it?" He said, we have an open position for the dean of the conservatory, and you really need to apply. And my response was, I laughed, because I thought that's like the most ridiculous thing. I said, I didn't get my PhD. I play a termite hollowed log. I've been working at Microsoft for 16 years. Like, a conservatory doesn't want that kind of guy to be the dean, but he persisted, and he said, you know what? You've got to apply. You're going to be a dark horse, but people need to see something different. They need to see something other than what they've seen, and you got to do this. And he was such a powerful influence in my life that, I just said, okay, I'll do it. And so, just kind of as a lark, put in my applications and applied for this deanship. And then lo and behold, as I'm interviewing, it dawns on me that this is like this perfect combination of my passion for music, my love of education, and then all the high level administrative stuff I'd been doing at Microsoft. And, halfway through that process, I was like, man, I really want this job. this would be perfect. And so when they offered it to me, I took it immediately. Everyone at Microsoft thought I was crazy. How could you leave how could you leave Seattle to go to Wisconsin, and how could you leave Microsoft to go to a small university? But it was really amazing, and I have to admire Lawrence for being that forward thinking to look at me, because most other places were only looking at dean candidates who had already been a dean for 10 years.
Sure.
And then 2 years after they hired them, they would complain that the new dean is an awfully lot like their old dean. And I would say, well, that's because you hired you absolutely guaranteed that you hired your old dean.
Right.
And the fact that Lawrence was willing to look at a guy from Microsoft who played a log, I thought was like this pretty amazing indication that it would be a good place to go to. So to me, what was amazing looking back on this was to look back at that day. I decided not to finish my PhD, which meant in my heart I wouldn't be going back to academia. And then 16 years later, say I took this completely different path through Microsoft and a high-level technology world. And it was really because of that I was able to come back to this thing I loved, in the role of the dean, but in a conservatory of music, which was, a pretty amazing journey to take.
Wow. I just recently started reading Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Workweek, which you may have read. There's millions of people have read it before I have started it. But one thing that he talks about is, in terms of just like taking risks, and about how that it's easier to return to things like academia than we think it is, and he obviously doesn't talk specifically about academia because he's not in it, but
right.
But that you don't know how it's going to happen, but things like that recital, which kind of seem to come out of nowhere, and then your trombone teacher and mentor insisting on it. It's a good lesson, because I think we're all wired, especially the older we get. That to the safe choice is we have to talk ourselves out of the safe choice rather than talk ourselves out of the more adventurous one. So
I think you're right. I mean, it would have been easy for me to stay at Microsoft. I mean, it was a great job. I loved it there. I could do the job without thinking a lot about it. It was pretty straightforward, and it really took that. Am I really reaching my full potential by just sort of hanging out and doing this job? Am I doing any benefit to Microsoft if that's how I'm approaching my job? And to be able to ask those questions, I think, is really vital. One of the greatest moments of advice, unsolicited advice, that I got, I was interviewing a candidate for Microsoft, and a wonderful, wonderful technology specialist who was in charge of sort of working on all the different ways to automate what we did in our group. And I said, well, what is your goal? Like, what's your goal in 5 years? And she said, my goal is to make my job obsolete. If I do my job right, there's no need for me anymore. And I thought, well, that's like the most courageous person I have ever met. That's to great. Basically say, my goal in my job is for me not to have my job, because she was just so confident that what she did could be applied to, all these other specific scenarios, that it wasn't, oh my gosh, how am I going to keep this? And, am I going to get fired? And to me, that was a real life lesson, and sort of opening yourself up to possibility and risk.
Wow, that's great. The other thing that I really liked in your story was the fact that that if your mentor had not pushed you, that you, as many of us do, it sounds like you were ready to decide that you weren't qualified for the job without even applying for it. And I actually just the other night I just ran into a friend of mine at the grocery store whose name is Alan Baylock, and he was just hired as the next director of the 1 O'Clock band at North Texas. which is that's like the premier college, big band director job in the world. And he almost didn't apply for it because he's in the Air Force, and he writes for the Airmen of Note and does a lot of arranging and all that stuff. But he's at 19 years right now, and 20 years is full retirement, which is a really big deal. No one leaves after 19 years. That's like a really, really, really bad idea. And so he almost didn't apply, and someone, I don't remember who, convinced him to just do it, and so he did it, and they wanted him, and he explained it all, and they wanted him so badly that they're letting him do 15% next year with a few trips in and some Skype stuff, and then they're hiring him fully in 2016. And that's a job where they could offer that to 300 people, and 300 of them would say yes. So so it's a bad idea to apply for a job like that with conditions unless you do it, and then they say, no, that was a good idea. So
exactly. It's a really interesting thing. When I got back to Lawrence as the dean, my goal was really to create a conservatory that would kind of change the rules of what we did. Because conservatory traditionally is pretty conservative, right? It's kind of in the name, and you prepare musicians for orchestras or bands or maybe teaching, but we do it in a very specific way. And I really wanted to change that paradigm to open up students' minds to the hundreds or thousands of possibilities of creating a musical life beyond, I'm going to play second chair clarinet in the Chicago Symphony, which may be great, and maybe you will, but maybe you can create your own chamber ensemble, or maybe you can do things that you've never even thought of before. And so I really see my role is to create a culture that is open to possibility and is opening students to possibility from the moment they step into this school, and really trying to get them to look outward and get excited about what could be.
Do you think that that you would be that focused on that if you had not left academia for that big chunk of time and worked for a huge company? I doubt it. I would like to think I would be a bit, but a lot of it sort of came from that atmosphere. Microsoft, big company, but when I got there, still small enough where the way things got done were very small groups of people being assigned to a task and then given an enormous amount of autonomy in the way they achieved that goal. So it was like, you guys, we need a digital world atlas. Figure it out, go for it, or do. And so you had like all of these smart people working in a super creative setting where there wasn't layers and layers of upper management saying, why are you doing this? How are you doing this? 16 years at Microsoft, no one ever came to me and said, why did you pick that piece of music? Or why did you decide to go that way with your music choices? There was this amazing autonomy, and the power of that approach in sort of unleashing creativity and potential it's enormous. And I wanted to see that same approach in an academic setting where you can put people together and say, well, what can you do that's amazing and new and maybe risky, but if you don't fail, you're not going to just succeed on the first time. You need a bunch of failures to get your success. So don't be afraid to do it. Yeah, what I just heard a quote yesterday, I think it was, that an expert is someone who has made every possible who has failed in every possible way in a narrow field or within a narrow field, something like that. It's like, it's a great quote. Did you, without getting into too much specifics, but did you get pushback from kind of trying to implement this new approach once you got there? It's been my experience that, that academia is not necessarily, and this isn't just academia, this is just what I have experience with. I'm sure this is a lot of businesses, but it's not necessarily the most nimble in terms of changing approaches and, philosophy. So what was that like?
Well, academia can be downright glacial in its pace of change.
Yes.
I was very lucky in having a faculty of about 35 full-time faculty and another 20 or so adjunct faculty who were excited to have me there, first of all. So I thought I'd get pushback just for coming in and being an ethnomusicologist that played didgeridoo, but it turned out that they were actually excited by that idea.
It's great.
And I in turn assured them that I was not trying to change the core mission of creating exceptional musicians, and that what they did in the studio to get the best tone quality and the best technical facility and musicality was still central to what we do. But I would start implementing, other opportunities for students. And that's what I tried to do, is instead of curricular change, because changing courses in a university, like what's required, is a bear.
It's more committees than most people would believe.
Right. Yeah. And it's years and everything else. Mm-hmm. But changing culture can be very quick, and it can be very potent. So we had some world music groups, for instance, because I really believe that one of the ways to opening up musical possibilities is to become multi-musical, sort of learn other musical languages. So now in our conservatory, we have 5 different world music groups that you can jump into. Gamelan and samba drumming and Ghanaian Ewe drumming and dancing and Cuban singing and didgeridoo, none of which are written page traditions. They're all oral traditions. You're opening up your ears, and none of them are required. There is no requirement to take these. But just by having those opportunities there, we're seeing a good chunk, even a majority of our students doing this during their time here. By creating more opportunities for classes in non-jazz improvisation, now we're having more and more and more and more students, string players, vocalists, jump into improvisation.
Awesome.
Which I think is, it's vital. But as long as it was just constrained to the world of jazz, you could either be scared by that or just say, well, I play violin, so I'm not going to do it. And so what I've tried to do is just create more and more opportunities for exploration. And by doing that, we're seeing a culture of explorers emerge in our students. And then they're starting to push and say, well, what else can we do? Can we combine improvisation with film and, video projections and composition? And then what are we going to do? And then can we make a business out of it? And, that's kind of the spirit we're trying to create here. Is one, my little secret is that, I don't share with everybody, but my wife has an incredibly innovative music education program in an elementary school. 1st grade to 6th grade. Every kid has music every day. They drum, they dance, they sing, they compose, they improvise, they collaborate, and they're just, you walk in and you see 2nd graders composing and grabbing someone on drums and someone on a xylophone, and they're just explosively creative beings. That's the model I want to have here at the conservatory.
Right.
By the time they get here, they're kind of closed off. They're awesome violinists or they're amazing saxophonists, but it's like that whole willingness to get on the floor and play and explore is kind of gone. And what I like to create here is this big sandbox where musicians and actors and artists can jump in and play and create things. And it's like not only okay, but it's like encouraged, like this is cool. And what you create might not be fantastic, but the next time it might be, and the next time it might be better, and you might be doing stuff you can't believe. And those are the transformations that I like to see, or the high-level classical violinists who came in and they could play anything. And then in their junior year, they jump into an improv class, and then they come into my office and say, oh my God, we got to talk, because I had no idea that this was even out there. And I need to figure out ways to integrate this into my musical self.
Wow. So much of that just absolutely flies in the face of like all of the classical traditions that we're raised on, whether explicitly or not, just in terms of like, don't miss notes, don't play any wrong rhythms, don't, it's all the stuff that you're not supposed to do, because if you do it, even if you get a job, you do it enough, then they fire you,
Right.
So it's all about avoiding mistakes.
Yeah, I think, and again, it's balancing, like we're still after high-level musicianship.
Sure.
And a high bar, but what else can you bring to it? And one of the things I got excited about was bringing, my passion for business and what I learned at Microsoft to a course called, ironically, the Entrepreneurial Musician.
I heard that. I was thinking that the Lawrence University's budget for lawyers is probably a lot higher than mine. So I was hoping you wouldn't come after me.
No, if we can share,
there you go.
That would be awesome, because I was just so excited to see your program. I was like, yes, I got to talk to this guy. But they're really trying to combine all of this into what is, at its heart, a business class. They will create a business proposal by the end of this class. But throughout the class, it's about finding your passion. It's about finding your creative self. It's about abolishing fear to try stuff. And it's trying to find ways, instead of giving entrepreneurship the lip service of, you got to think outside of the box, you got to be innovative, you got to approach things in new ways. But it's like, if you don't practice doing that, then how in the hell are you supposed to be good at it? Because we practice our instruments to be good at it. But then we're just supposed to be awesome at being innovative and trying new things. So
Amen.
We go into the dance studio and we scare the crap out of all of us because we dance and move. We go into the racquetball courts and we do improvisatory singing and deep listening. We'll do all sorts of kind of these collaborative creative acts that are scary and make us uncomfortable, but also show that what we can do creatively. Like try to open up, try to get ourselves in this liminal space, kind of one of those spaces in between where the creativity kind of opens up and you have a freedom to kind of create and explore. And only once we've done that for like a month do we actually start focusing in on what's your business proposal going to be. And that's been a real pleasure to teach, and it's been a real amazing. It's been amazing to watch what the students do in that class and what they emerge from that class with, the tools that they come out of that with.
Yeah, you're not going to change the world by remaining comfortable.
No.
I'm not sure anyone ever has.
No, you got to, and that's it, man. Get your palms sweaty, and then it forces me to, because I can't be up there like on the soapbox saying, try stuff that you're scared of, and that forces me to, right? Then I have to too.
Yeah, it's funny how if you're telling it, or even if you're just working with a student on some famous excerpt, again, the Ride of the Valkyries, as I always come back to as a tuba player, it's like if I'm telling a student how they have to make sure that the dotted 8th, 16th rhythms are not at all triplety, then if I play it for them, you better believe that I'm subdividing with purpose. So otherwise, they kind of give you that look like, sure, dude, yeah, I'll give you a few moments to work on that if you want to try again.
Right.
So, and it's the same thing, I'm sure, with that entrepreneurship class, where you have to, you can't be telling people to get out of their comfort zone without doing it yourself.
And then just let them know that, you're willing to explore too, that you're willing to try new things, and you're willing to be a collaborator and not telling them what to do, but be a partner in helping them get there. I mean, that's just such an exciting thing to be a part of. It's like being at Microsoft again,
right?
Except, the people you're working with are students instead of programmers.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. And that kind of also doubles back to you talking about, getting students to improvise, not just within the jazz, the confines of jazz, where I remember when I first started improvising, as a classical player, it's, that, when I was young, I was too stupid to get nervous about anything. You put a part in front of me, and like when I was like an eighth grader, and I would just dive in. Like there was never any hesitation at all. But then the first time that I was told to play notes that didn't exist, quote unquote, I was terrified. I was completely terrified, and I was going to be the tuba player in the Boston Symphony when I grew up. I was probably about in fifth grade, and I saw one of the regional military bands. I don't remember which. It was probably one of the regional Army bands down in Florida. They came to my grandmother's retirement community, and one of the tuba players was in the lobby afterwards and was nice enough to talk to me. And my mother loves telling this story because this guy who was being great, and I told him I played the tuba, and he was all in and was really excited, and he told me that if I worked really hard, that someday that I could be in a band, just like this one. And I said to him without blinking, I said, "Oh no, I'm going to be in the Boston Symphony."
Nice.
And luckily he smiled. So luckily he found that funny.
Yes.
No, I'm going to make probably 2.5 times what you're making now. So, but not that I was thinking of it that way, but you never know. I mean, and then I ended up getting the quintet opportunity, and luckily I was prepared for that for Boston Brass, because I had been taken out of my comfort zone so many times and had collaborated so many times. And I used to do all sorts of weird stuff at Northwestern with friends, and with spoken word, and I mean just random. I got in with the weird kids. So
great.
Yeah,
and that to me is kind of where we're trying to go, is to always ask, why does a conservatory recital have to look like it does? Why is it, go on, bow, clap, play your piece, go off? Why isn't it a performance from sort of tip to tail, from the time you walk in till the time you enter this engaging, wonderful experience? And really trying to engage students like that and change this kind of this weight of a culture that's been, doing the same thing the same way for decades and decades and decades. And we're seeing those changes happen. And as soon as the upperclassmen are starting to sort of break down those barriers, and freshmen and sophomores can look at that and say, oh, what can I do like that? Instead of what the hell are they doing? We have to be back in this box. Then they can start thinking about, well, if I love classical music so much, can I think of new ways to present it and new ways to draw audiences in, instead of just saying, "Oh my God, classical music is dying, and what a pity and what a shame." It's like, well, no, it isn't. We just have to rethink how we're doing it and how we're presenting it. And I'm so excited by all those possibilities that, I come to work every day and just I couldn't be more excited about what I get to do here.
Well, I know that if I were listening to this podcast and hearing someone in your position talking about just kind of reimagining recitals and things like that, I would be doing like fist pumps in my car. So that's really great. And I haven't heard you say a single thing along these lines, and I know that you don't mean this, but that's like not at all slighting, classical music and the traditions, and like even remotely slighting any of that. But yeah, that's kind of one of those assumptions that we all bring, which is just like, well, I'm a tuba player. I need to play the Vaughan Williams Concerto, which is a great piece of music that's very worthwhile artistically and musically to both study and perform. But, and there's just kind of like, there's a bunch of checklists that, you have to play this before you graduate and that. And then, yeah, there's a lot of places that don't push the things that you're pushing there, that don't leave you super prepared to. There's not too many tuba players in the world who get paid to regularly perform the Von Williams tuba concerto.
Right.
You know, like that. That list is on. I can name on like one hand,
right.
Globally. So.
And interestingly, you know, to me, over 7 years now of doing this job, you know, even my performance degree candidates, if you ask them, almost every single one, their real passion is playing with other people. I mean, very few say, my biggest joy is to sit out on a recital stage in front of a piano by myself and play Von Williams. That might be part of the joy, but typically it's like, I love my quintets. I love my quartets. I love the big ensembles. I love music as a communal activity. And so in some ways our recitals are a fiction that way, because they're focused on a rep that most of us will not end up spending a lot of time playing over and over again. Some of us will. And that's great. And I love all those pieces that, you know, it's fantastic. But if that isn't where you find your joy, then you can be super high level musician in a brass quintet or a string quartet or whatever it is, or a mixed group that's never existed before, and you're writing your own music for it.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, whenever I have a student who's interested in going into chamber music or something like that, I kind of I beg them to. I point out that the world, the market is not screaming for another group with two trumpets, French horn, trombone, and tuba. And that doesn't mean that there's not room for someone to do it better than Canadian brass is doing it, better than Boston brass is doing it, better than, you know, all of the groups that have come before them. But yeah, why not get something together with like oboe, you know, clarinet, tuba, and baritone, you know, like baritone voice. I mean, that's weird. I'm going to click on that just to hear what the heck that sounds like. You know, like why would you do that? You know, and then if it's great, I'm going to share that on Facebook and on Twitter. I'm going to tell all my friends about it. I'm going to, you know, and then, you know, that's collaboration is and being creative about collaborating. I think that's a lot easier when you do it in school, you know, and so I think that's a great thing that you've got them starting. The time to get out of your comfort zone is during school. It's never going to be easier than when you're in school. And when I was in graduate school, my mentor Sam Palafian, he told me that there was a group called the Dixie Devils at Arizona State, and he told me that I was. That when I got there, he said, "You're the new tuba player," and I said, "That's awesome. I love Dixie music, but you know, I don't play it. You know, like how to, you know." And then he said, "That's great. You're the new tuba player." And that was kind of the
right.
Thus ends the lesson, you know. And I'm exaggerating a little bit. It's not like he like walked out, but that was he was just kind of gave me a supportive look, like figure it out. You're a smart guy. Figure it out, you know. And so I went, and I was not very good the first time I did it because, you know, my time was there. There was a few things I brought to the table, but like, yeah, it's like my brain was going a million miles an hour. It was like you were asking me to operate on someone, you know, and I've never taken a day of medical school in my life, and that's what it felt like, was riding on these changes and all that. And lo and behold, fast forward to when I got the break with Boston Brass and was subbing with them with like a day's warning, and there was a part with changes, and I was like, yeah, I don't sound like Ray Brown on tuba, but yeah, I can do it. Yeah, absolutely. You know, like, yeah, I can do that to a passable, to a passable level because I was made to do it. So.
Oh, and it's not just for music. I mean, that's how I felt my first day at Microsoft. It's like,
I bet you did.
So your job, hi, you're the new editor for this thing. Yes, I am the new editor. I have no idea how to even turn the computer on, but I am the new editor at Microsoft.
I bet you let them close your office door before you looked around back for the power button.
Right? It's like, oh crap. But it's a lot of things in life. You just sort of suck it up and say, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? The worst thing that can happen is I don't have this job by the end of the day because I sucked that bad. But, you know,
But then you do something else. Yeah, Tim Ferriss
Right.
is big on that too. Yeah, he encourages you to think of the absolute worst possible case scenario
Yeah.
of whatever you're doing, and then like on a death being a 10 and
Yeah.
and not really anything being a 1, like, and then you kind of rate that, and then he's like, so maybe it's a 4, like, and
Yeah.
that's temporary,
Yeah.
and yet
So
we all act like it's a if you mess up the if you mess up the bridge on the sunny side of the street,
Yeah.
in a Dixie gig where there's like 9 people at a retirement community in the audience, not to
Right.
minimize playing for that audience or a small audience or
No.
whatever, but no one dies, like nothing, there's no famine,
Right.
nothing happens. And likewise, if you have a business venture that works or doesn't work, so far I've had a really good response to the podcast, but if no one's listening to this, then I'll either change it up or I'll stop and do something else, or you pivot, you discontinue, you just fail and fail early, and then just kind of move on from that. So
That's exactly right. Man, there's so many cool opportunities out there that you don't want to live with regrets and say, "Well, boy, I really should have done that. I really should have tried that opportunity that I said no to."
That
Right?
was I kind of drew some power in the couple of times when and I got very lucky that I got the job with Boston Brass when I was halfway through my graduate degree. So I don't want to make it sound like I was in any way long in suffering. Like, that's exactly how you draw it up, before you go into it. But in the couple of moments of doubt, like, I kind of drew strength from knowing that the only thing that I was not going to do was be sitting on a rocking chair when I was 75 years old at my parents' summer house and not having been compensated to be a musician, and then knowing deep down that I hadn't done absolutely everything I could to succeed. So, and I just knew that as long as I just left it all on the court, as one of many sports cliches, and then I failed, and it was like, well, great, then I'll go do something else. And I had no idea what that was, but figured something else out, and then you just kind of look around, and my heroes all learn from their failures. So you learn more from your failures than from your successes. So, but unless you're an uptight classical musician, which we kind of all are at heart, when we come from that tradition, and then you're kind of terrified, because then you even hear about your teacher who plays in the Boston Symphony or whatever, and then it's like, if he or she misses, 4 notes in a concert, they get, there's like a, if you're a brass player, there's a little bit more coverage in the strings, but I won't say that too loudly or I'll make them mad. But and then that happens again the next concert, then you get called into the music director's office, and they're like, what's going on? So. All right, so we are going to close things up here with the 5 questions segment, which are just kind of 5 short questions. Number 1, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I'm not quite sure who said this, but the one I try to live by is be ready for anything, and anything just might happen.
Oh, that's good.
Which kind of fits what I've been able to do in life. I feel like I've just sort of jumped around, but as I look back, it all seems to make perfect sense. And it all goes into be like, don't be afraid to put yourself out there and be ready for that opportunity, and then take it when it shows up.
That's great. Don't tell Microsoft that you don't know how to edit a CD-ROM. That's great.
I do now.
That's so funny. You said, wait, no one knows how to do this. These things haven't existed until last week. Okay, number 2, what is the biggest mistake you've ever made in your career?
To me, I think at my beginning of my management career at Microsoft, with just being too micromanaging, like just trying to control stuff instead of realizing that giving freedom to people gives you so much more, and it maximizes their potential, but the result is always going to be 1,000 times better than sticking your nose into stuff. And so now with everything I try to do is try to give a lot of room for people to run, and just stay out of their way.
Well, that's great. All right, number 3, what is a business or entrepreneurial book that you'd recommend to musical entrepreneurs?
I do love The Savvy Musician by David Cutler. He's a good friend and find that very helpful. But one non-music oriented book that I just love is a book called Switch, which is a business book by Chip and Dan Heath. And it's called How to Change Things When Change is Hard.
Huh.
And it's about, it's about business. It's about how do you make big changes in a system. It could be your family, or it could be a conservatory, it could be a business. But it's really about human psychology. It's about how to change the minds of a group of people who might be terrified to make a change for whatever personal reason, and to really think about how to approach those things so you can make the big changes. And you probably can guess, as I sit here at the top of a conservatory trying to make some big changes, that this is a book that really, really interests me. But it's applicable to everything, not just my little corner of the world.
Cool. David Cutler is a good friend of mine as well. Actually,
awesome.
I was one of the thought leaders at his first Savvy Musician in Action retreat a couple years ago.
Nice.
So, yep. All right. Number 4. What is the one entrepreneurial skill that every college music major should graduate with?
I think it would be, and this is going to be sort of the high level skill of being fearless and a willingness to try things, a willingness to go out there. I figure you can always learn how to make a website. You can always learn how to, do bookkeeping and all of the niggly stuff. But if you're so terrified that you'll never actually start your company, or you'll never actually play that gig where you're singing for the first time or whatever it is, then the other stuff isn't going to matter. So I would say sort of a confident fearlessness and a realization of all that you can do.
That's great. The interview right before you was Jeff Nelson, who has developed the Fearless Performance thing, and he talks all about and has like a really great program along those lines. So that dovetails nicely. And then the last question, number 5, which is kind of related to number 4. Are there any assumptions that you see students regularly make about the music business that you would ask them to challenge?
Yeah, I would say, to me, they view it as much, much narrower than it has to be. That their view of the music business is rather narrow, and it's why I always call it a musical life instead of, a musical career or whatever, because for most of us musicians, it's not one thing.
Right.
It's a patchwork of things.
The portfolio musician. Yep.
A portfolio. It's this beautiful array of all sorts of things, and that I never would have thought as a conservatory student that being the dean was a musical job. Right.
Right.
I mean, I didn't even know what a dean did. I had no idea. But now, sitting here and realizing the impact you can have on your community, on your students, on where they're going to go and how they're going to influence, to me, it's like there are musical careers and jobs out there that no one's even thinking of.
There you go. Those are some great answers. Brian, thank you so much. I think I know I've learned a ton. I know that anybody listening has learned a ton. And as I said before, it's so refreshing to hear someone in your position. And that's not talking bad about all the deans out there. But
no.
And I've never been a dean for even 5 minutes, so it's easy. It's easy for me to preach that you should all be more forward thinking, and because I'm just operating in a vacuum of reality, so but it's great to hear the changes and just the energy and the direction that you're nudging students in, and the entire conservatory as a whole. So we thank you for all of that.
Thank you so much for the chat, and keep on doing what you're doing. It's fantastic.
So where can people find you online?
Mostly, I mean, you can just, I don't have a personal web page, but there's a lot of things that are related to what I'm doing, either through Lawrence. You can just do Google searches or Bing searches. A lot of the stuff I'm doing and how I'm working with my faculty to sort of re-envision the conservatory is on the Lawrence Conservatory page. We have something called the 21st Century Musicianship Initiative, which kind of encapsulates a lot of these different ideas that we're trying to put together to create 21st century musicianship. So, you can just find me in the usual places and some of the unusual places with a web search.
I would also encourage people to check out the TEDx talk that you did
thank you.
on arts advocacy, which is a little oversimplified, but it's really, really well done. And once you hear that you were an English major in addition to trombone performance and ethnomusic, the whole thing makes even more sense just because of how kind of passionate you are about how intertwined they are. So that's absolutely worth the watch. So
excellent. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Brian.
Great.
You've been listening to The Entrepreneurial Musician with Andrew Hitz on the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network. If you would like to help support the podcast in order to make more episodes like this one possible, please visit pedalnotemedia.com/donate for more details. You can sign up for my monthly newsletter and find my blog at andrewhitz.com. You can also find me at facebook.com/hitztuba, and I'm at hitztuba on Twitter. The Entrepreneurial Musician is produced by Austin Boyer and Buddy Deschler of the Fredericksburg Brass Institute. Executive producer is Andrew Hitz. The theme music was performed by Ben Barron, Rich Kelly, Daniel Lapel, and Andrew Hitz. This has been a presentation of the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network.